All right. The article on housing on Monday about the Department of Housing. I did not. Bill, drop a link, please. I'd love to read that. Yay, Great Panthers are here. All right. All right, we'll get started shortly. I was inviting folks, if you are tuning in, if you want to drop where you are across Long Beach, your neighborhood, zip code, so we can say hi to all of our neighbors coming on. That'd be awesome. And 0802. We'll get started in 1 minute. All right, it is 6:04. We're gonna go ahead and get started because we already got a good group of folks watching and tuning in. So good evening, everyone. Great to see you all. I was just inviting folks, if you are on the webinar right now and want to say hello to fellow neighbors or organizations you're representing, go ahead and drop that in the chat box. If you want to shout out your neighborhood or zip code, if you're watching on Facebook or the YouTube page as well, I invite you to do the same, because all of this is also not just about defunding the police, but building community. So I want to invite folks to do that as well. And thank you so much for joining us. I know it is a Thursday evening, so you all have a lot of other things that you can be doing, but I'm excited for you all to join us and learn more about the proposed city budget and how it compares with the people's budget. So exciting to see some familiar names, not seeing faces, but familiar names, but also some new folks here, and welcoming you to join us. So just to get us a little started, my name is James. I am with the People's Budget Campaign and Long Beach Forward. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm excited to host this tonight and walk us through some of this, but in a shortly I'm going to turn it over to one of our other organizers on this campaign, Elsa, who's going to do a much deeper dive into all of the data and things like that, because we love numbers. So I will say too, like, the one thing I've heard consistently from people is how massive and confusing the budget is, the city budget is. And and we recognize that part of this, oftentimes we say, it's confusing and difficult to comb through and maybe to understand and even really engage in by design, right? So the purpose of these teach-ins that we've been doing, this is our 3.0, our third one that we've been doing, is to really make this information more accessible and engage as many people as we can. So not only are we doing this in English right now at 7 p.m. On our same Facebook and YouTube platforms, we're going to be doing all of the same information, but in Spanish. So I want to encourage you all, if you haven't already, if you're tuning in, share this link and share it on Facebook or YouTube. Send it to folks right now. I'll give you like a minute to do that before we jump into the meaty information and everything like that. But I also encourage you, this will be up live, and hopefully you can encourage other folks to digest this information as well, because that is how we win. That's how we're going to defund the people, defund LBPD, and pass the people's budget. We're not going to defund the people's budget. That's how we're going to do it, is by sharing this information and building that community. So hello to all the folks who are saying hi in our chat box here. If you're on Zoom right now, I just want to orient you to some other things too. We also have our Q&A open. So if you want to ask specific pointed questions, you can drop them in the Q&A. And our organizers who are on the back end will help make sure that we see those questions and get some answers there. If we're not covering something in the webinar, you just have additional questions. But I also encourage you to drop other thoughts, reactions, and things like that into the chat box, or if you're on Facebook or YouTube, into the comments, so that we can collect all this stuff together. All of this stuff's going to be posted online afterwards, including the recordings, but also the slides. And again, encourage you all to share that too. So if you haven't already, if this is your first time hearing about the People's Budget, I encourage you to go to lb4.org/peoples-budget, so you can actually download the People's Budget and learn about what we're organizing around and what we're calling for. But really want to welcome you into this and orient you into our effort right now. We're in the city of Long Beach. We are in the middle of the budget process. So there are hearings going on. There was two budget hearings so far at the city council. We also want to do this really timely because this upcoming Tuesday, starting at 3 p.m., if it's not on your calendar already, is the police department budget hearing, which is going to be big. We're going to talk about that. So really want to encourage you to check out those materials so you're a little bit more familiar with this. And excited for you to join us in this People's Budget campaign, which is meant to really look at how we can defund the police, divest from the police department, and reinvest in Black lives and communities of color, really bring equity to the city budget. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Elsa Tung with Long Beach Forward and the People's Budget campaign to walk us through the rest of this. So take it away, Elsa. Oh, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. Let's start that over. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, James, for that intro. And thank you so much all for being here, for being on the Zoom, or for being on any of the live streams that we have going. So my name is Elsa Tung. I am a land use program manager at Long Beach Forward. But I've also been involved in the People's Budget campaigns basically since my first day on the job in 2018. I started in August, and as James says, August is hot, hot, hot budget season. So I've been involved in the People's Budget campaigns for the past couple years and have been doing some of the kind of research and digging for this year's People's Budget. So we'll get into it. Forward this slide. There you go. So as we alluded to, we're in August, which is here with the green box. The budget process is honestly, it is a full year process. There's a lot that goes on in the beginning of the year where the departments start to develop it. They work with the city manager, city council members get brought into the process. May through July is when folks start to finalize things. And then in August, the mayor and the city manager jointly release their budgets. Basically, the city manager releases the big budget. It's called the budget book. It's like literally a book, a 140-page document or so. And the mayor releases his recommendations to change, or alterations or recommendations to that budget. So that just happened last week. And no, last week? Oh my gosh, now that the dates are blending. It happened on August 3rd. And what we've been having since then is a series of budget hearings, typically aligned with the city council meetings on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. In September, basically by the middle of September, they have to pass, the city council has to adopt the budget, and the mayor has to do the final signature to approve it. And on October 1st, the start of the fiscal year, is when they will have the new budget in place. So we're really in a hot season right now. And as I said, on August 3rd, Mayor Robert Garcia and the city manager, Tom Modica, they released the proposed FY21 budget. that is available at this bit.ly, this short link, bit.ly/people's budget toolkit. This is not only, where you can find a link to the city budget, but also where you can find basically information and guidance on how to contact your city council members, how to post on social media, how to tag your city council members and the mayor. All of that information is at bit.ly/people's budget toolkit. So we'll actually, James, if you can drop that link into the chat, that'd be awesome. At the bottom of this document is a number of links to the official city documents where the budget is. So what we're looking at this year, and so these next few slides will come into what is being proposed, what was just released on August 3rd. The whole city budget is $2.6 billion. As you'll see in this slide, though, 80% of that is so-called restricted, meaning these dollars, 80% of 2.6 billion, they're already set aside for specific purposes, specific uses, specific expenditures. 20% of the city budget is non-restricted, meaning flexible, meaning discretionary, meaning the city council has the power to move that money around in lots of different ways. And that's what we call our general fund. Our general fund, again, is that 20% of flexible dollars. Our general fund this year is proposed to be at $543.6 million. So just over $500 million. The revenue side of that, where that money comes from, is mostly taxes, as you'll see. Sales and property taxes, 69% of the general fund comes from sales and property tax. 31% comes from services, which for me, it's easier to think of it as fines and fees and permit fees. So it is basically mostly what we, as Long Beach resident taxpayers, pay into the city. And that's the $543.6 million of flexible money. What does that look like split up into departments? Now, if you've attended any of our other teach-ins, this chart may look familiar, proportionately at least, it might look familiar. The colors may be a little bit different. This is a simplified and simplified for a point chart of how that general fund is split up. In blue is police. 44% of the general fund is going to police. In red is health, the health department, library department, parks, rec and marine, and public works. These are our essential services, our essential departments. What we typically think of, when we think of city services. Obviously, in the pandemic, we are thinking a lot about the health department. When we're thinking about whether schools are opening or closing or distance learning or not, we're also thinking about the libraries. Where are our children or our families going to get the books and resources and online connectivity to learn in this extremely challenging era? We think about parks, recreation. Where are we going? If we are stuck in our homes during the quarantine, we need parks and open space to get out into the open. Parks also have incredible youth programs, senior programs, healthy living programs, and public works. Public works is everything from our streets, our sidewalks, our trash and recycling. These extremely critical and essential city services, that only gets 17.9, about 18% of the general fund. So that's less than half of what the police gets. Now, the other departments are sort of all lumped together. First of all, this orangey yellow section, 38%, That does include the fire department. We are differentiating the fire department from police, as well as a lot of the administrative departments, mayor, city council, city manager, city attorney, city auditor, a lot of these sort of managerial departments of the city. That's at 38%. So that's the sort of second biggest chunk. But again, if you look at the proportion between police and what we think of as essential services, it's stark. I would argue it's quite I don't know. I've been using the word obscene a lot, so I'll say it's quite obscene. Now, this is what we have in FY20, which is this year, this fiscal year that we are wrapping up right now, and FY21, what's being proposed for the next year. What's the difference? We don't even have to really look at the numbers here. The point is look at the visual, look at the proportions. Is anything different, or does it look virtually the same? To me, it looks virtually the same. And that's because it is. Police in this FY21 proposed budget, they're still getting 44% of the general fund. Why is that? And what can we do to structurally change what happens year over year over year over year? These proportions, this spending, these investments haven't changed. Let's dig deeper into what the police department budget looks like. We are, in partnership with the Black Lives Matter movement, Black Lives Matter Long Beach. We are calling for defunding the police, defund LBPD. Where does the police funds go to? Most of it, as you can see in dark blue, goes to the patrol bureau. That is basically officers on the street, in the community, in their patrol cars. Equally, we've got investigations in yellow and the support bureau in green. So all of that together looks like it's mostly going to police officers who are patrolling or so-called investigating situations. This next slide is more interesting because this is saying where's that money going in terms of people, people versus other things. 80% of this budget, and I should mention this is, I guess this is this current year's fiscal year. So it's 2019-2020. And this is the full budget, not only the portion out of the general fund, though the police department is predominantly funded out of the general fund. But this slide shows 80% of the police budget is going to salaries, wages, and benefits. And then if you tack on that orange slice, which is overtime, that's 84% is going to people. What is it? 4% is going to materials and supplies, $9.8 million. But the vast, vast majority of the spending is in people. Do we need those people and those officers in particular? Do we need those officers to be addressing the issues that they are addressing? We would argue no, and I'm going to actually read from, if my other computer will turn on, I'm going to read from a letter that Black Lives Matter Long Beach sent to the city council this past week as city council met on Tuesday. The public's, this is quote from the Black Lives Matter Long Beach letter, the public's cry to defund LBPD speaks to the overdue need for the city of Long Beach to work with its residents to reimagine community safety and meet the basic needs of its communities. There is a basic work being held under the police department that does not belong to that department, such as youth, gang, crossing guards, quality of life, mental health, homelessness. That is work that belongs to other professions. Defunding the department may consist of simply shifting that non-emergency work to more appropriately fitting city departments. That's what we're talking about. So just to again put this in perspective, police funding versus everything else. For every $1 the city of Long Beach spends on police, it spends only 60 cents on our health department, including in a global pandemic. Imagine if those numbers were reversed. For every $1 the city of Long Beach spends on police, it spends only 23 cents on our parks. That to me, and I am formerly a park equity advocate in my former work. That's extremely disturbing to me. Our parks are essential parts of our community. We have areas that are park poor that do not get enough both park land and park services. We're spending, basically 5 times what we spend on parks on the police department. In the coming year, in FY21, LBPD is poised to have more staff, both sworn officers and civil service, than the health, library, parks, and economic development departments combined. Imagine if this budget really aligned with our community's real values. What are our needs? And where is the money being spent? We would argue it's not being spent where the needs are. A note here on a process that has been happening over the past several weeks and perhaps over a month. Since the Black Lives Matter uprisings, the city has undertaken a racial equity and reconciliation initiative. That initial report was just released last week along with the budget. There is some funding to tackle some of these recommendations. In particular, there's $1.5 million to start implementing the racial equity recommendations, including youth programs, violence prevention, trauma-informed responses to the community's needs. This is language from the city, so I'm not sure exactly what that may look like. The Office of Equity, yes, the City of Long Beach has an Office of Equity. It has been housed in the health department thus far. And so this year it's being proposed to be elevated to the city manager's office with 1 additional staffer. That is significant. That is very important. The Office of Equity has been doing really great work with the staffing and resources that it has, and the staffing and resources and authority that it has, but it does not have enough staffing and resources and authority. So elevating it into the city manager's office is a very positive step. There are police reforms proposed both in this racial equity initiative and in the city budget. In particular, the reforms are so-called civilianizing. That's converting 34 sworn officers into 28.7, about 29 civilian positions. So what they're proposing to do is to take out sort of low-level nonviolent responses and not putting that in the hands of armed officers, but rather in civilians, civil service working in the police department. However, this is still money and positions and personnel in the police department. It is not actually defunding or shifting. There's also $150,000 in the proposed budget to study reforms for the Citizens Police Complaint Commission. We don't know. We don't know what that exactly looks like. It sounds like they're basically using that money to hire a consultant to study reforms. Overall, and there's a lot more funding that honestly the community, in particular Black Lives Matter, hasn't necessarily been asking for, that the city is lumping into the racial equity and reconciliation funding. So overall, in this last bullet point, it comes out to $3.2 million. Which you know, folks, the city in particular is saying, hey, yes, we are investing in racial equity. But if you think about it, and if you look at it in comparison to the police budget, that is 1%. 1% of the police budget is what we're investing into racial equity and reconciliation. So instead of actually defunding the police, which is where racial equity should start, we are investing 1% into solving racism. So for us, that is wholly inadequate. You'll also hear, and you know, all the council members and the city management have been saying, yes, we are facing in this extraordinary crisis year with the global pandemic, we are facing a $30 million budget shortfall from the city's projected revenues. Most of that the city is proposing to cover through transfers, meaning transfers from state and federal governments in particular, and also tapping into the city's reserves, and also employee furloughs. Given the uncertainty around these revenues, cuts to city services may be imminent. Here's the thing though, we cannot repeat the mistakes of the Great Recession, where of 2008, 2009, 2010, where we cut programs that could have helped families heal, recover, and grow. What we mean by that is, look at the past 15 years. The color coding is a little bit different from previous slides, so just bear with me. The top line in red is police. The bottom line in gray is those essential departments: health, library, parks, and public works. If you look at, and I think you can see my mouse cursor, hopefully, if you look at where in sort of the 2008 period, the essential services were funded, and then you look at it, so this is about 91.8 million, and then you look at it a few years later, 80.8 million. This is a drop of about $11 million. Our essential services were cut significantly during the recession. However, if you look at that same period, the police funding up here on the top line, that's at 213.7 million. And a few years later in that same period, it went up. It went up by a few $1,000,000. So while our essential services were being cut, the police was being escalated. And if you see on the line here, generally, yes, we have some dips, but generally, and look over the past 5 or so years, it has been going up and up and up, while our essential services departments have been struggling to get back to their pre-recession levels. So yes, we do have a $30 million shortfall in this year. What is the simple solution to that though? Defund LBPD. $30 million as a shortfall is only, if you look at this year's police budget, $30 million is only 12% of the police budget. That is the simple solution: defund LBPD to fill our budget shortfall. And I won't belabor this point, but now we're going to transition into what defunding looks like. We're not defunding for the sake of defunding. We're divesting for the sake of reinvesting. So this is a quote here by Alex Vital, who's written a lot about police abolition. He says, every time a community calls for more police to solve their crime and disorder problems, it is re-empowering not just the police, but a deeply conservative ideology that is at root demeaning to poor people and dismissive of the ability of the state to use social programs and market interventions to empower and reinvigorate communities. So policing is not the answer to our schools and communities' most pressing needs. When we divest from police, we can redirect resources so that Black, Indigenous, and people of color can live successful lives. What does that look like? That looks like the people's budget. James, did you wanna say something?
Yeah, I don't know if I added in a slide because it was relevant to this section. So I don't know if you have the Google Slides handy um, that you can project, but we had a really good question. I thought it was appropriate just to add in here on our Q&A. One of our attendees asked, how much do other cities with similar demographics as Long Beach spend on police budgeting, on the police budget? So yeah, it's the one right above this, slide 18 on
Sure.
your slide. So if you could throw that up there, I can walk folks through it really quickly. Yeah, that one.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So if you haven't, and I just wanted to put this in there just because it was relevant to what Elsa was talking about before we move on. I would recommend if you're interested, there is a really great tool put together by the Vera Institute called What Policing Costs. If you Google what policing costs, Vera Institute, you'll be able to find this. But these numbers are based off different interpretations. And for instance, some cities like Oakland, for example, although Oakland is not on this chart, Oakland has a budget specific for their police commission, right? So which is a different model than what Long Beach has. So whether you're considering, those monies going into policing, things like that, that can skew some of these costs. So that's my disclaimer about some of this data. And some of these are different relative to size. So for instance, Los Angeles is a much bigger city than a city of Long Beach. So even though it's only 33% of city funds, it's still a bigger budget dollar-wise than what we're spending on the Long Beach Police Department. But when you look at the share of city funds, you can see that we're comparable to Fresno. And I don't know how many times we get compared, Long Beach gets compared to Fresno, but you can see here how we kind of stack up in terms of how much of our city funds are devoted and invested into policing. So the police budget and things like that. So oftentimes, I'm not quite sure what criteria was used and why Oakland was not in the Vera database. You can look at that and do a much deeper dive here, but Oakland is a comparable city to Long Beach in terms of demographics and size. The other one is Sacramento. So oftentimes when you look at some of those demographics and things, we often can compare Sacramento pretty easily to Long Beach. But even in Sacramento, that's 26% of city funds, very different from the 43%, slightly higher in Long Beach too. So, and if you are interested, I would recommend this tool if you haven't seen it before, because it's a great way to play around with how the budget in Long Beach is actually spent on policing. You could actually and play around with it and imagine how you would respend those dollars as well. So thanks for the interruption. I just wanted to throw that out there because that was a really great question that I wanted to make sure we got answered.
Nice, that's awesome. And James, if you want to throw in the link into the chat, this what policing costs link, that'd be awesome.
I will.
So the people's budget, this is what we've been gearing towards. We are in partnership with a whole lot of other coalitions and organizations, including, of course, Black Lives Matter Long Beach. We are calling for divesting from LBPD and reinvesting in Black lives and communities of color. What that looks like is, number one, reimagine community safety. Number two, affordable and supportive housing. Three, a right to counsel program for all renters. We'll go into each of these very, very briefly. For a citywide rental housing division, we honestly, as a city of 500,000 people, we do not have a housing department. Number five, community health councils, job training 6, language access 7, senior and youth programs 8, and universal legal representation for immigrants. We are reinvesting in Black lives and communities of color. How? We want to reimagine community safety grounded in restorative justice and Black empowerment. That means Black family unification and prevention strategies, again, that are outside of the police department, where the police department does not belong. Reparations to Black and African American people, prioritizing families impacted by the decades-long war on drugs, which of course disproportionately affected Black people and brown people, and community-led restoration events. We're talking about restoration, reparations, restorative justice. We are also looking at housing. The next several demands will be about housing. Housing is the single largest expenditure that most people have, most families have. We're sorely lacking in affordable and supportive housing. Supportive housing in particular includes wraparound services for people experiencing homelessness or on the brink of homelessness. We need more affordable housing units in the city of Long Beach, not luxury high rises. We're calling for a right to counsel for all renters, which means it would provide legal defense and rental assistance to Long Beach residents and families facing evictions. That means 1,700 families per year are facing evictions and get to court unrepresented, without legal representation. And most of those cases without legal representation are judged in the favor of the landlord, and tenants get evicted. This is a cause of homelessness. This is a part of the homelessness crisis. So what we're asking for here is $4.4 million. To put that in perspective, that's less than 2% of the LBPD budget. We are also calling for a citywide rental housing division. Again, Long Beach does not have a centralized housing department to implement and enforce all of these citywide and statewide tenant protection policies, this rental assistance that the city is trying to do in this COVID era, including the protection of the COVID-19 eviction moratorium. The city needs dedicated staff to communicate with tenants and landlords, centralize information, enforce these protections and policies. The city is not doing that, not doing this most basic of public services. The investment we're calling for is simply for dedicated staff. So this is about 5.5 full-time employees at the city. That's about $700,000. Again, to put that in perspective, that's less than 0.5% of the Long Beach Police Department budget. We are calling for community health councils, the neighborhood-based model for community-led crisis response for mental health, safety, and well-being emergencies. We're calling for jobs, free job training and job opportunities for Black residents, and revising the city's project labor agreement, which is basically the agreement that the city does to contract with workers on all city sort of infrastructure, big money, big dollar projects. We need to fund an independent jobs coordinator so that Black residents can actually benefit from union jobs. If anybody has been listening to the city council meetings of late, you will understand this next point, which is language access. We have had, in particular, Spanish community members who have called in to provide critical public comment to the city council meetings. The translation has been poor, has been rude, and community members have to ask for this in advance. It is not a part of the city culture to be inclusive of any other languages besides English. So we need a culture of language justice. We need to move translation and interpretation services in-house, provide staffing in-house, and also community outreach stipends to the community organizations who have been working on these issues for years. The investment we're calling for is a $2.3 million investment. Again, put it in perspective, that is less than 1% of the LBPD budget. And finally, we're calling for senior and youth programming. This is prevention. This is not, Band-Aid solutions. These are prevention solutions. Programming through community organizations, centers, libraries, parks in historically disinvested and divested neighborhoods. Finally, we're calling for universal legal representation for immigrants. We're calling on the city to recommit to funding the Long Beach Justice Fund, which was put into place 2 years ago to support to support immigrants, members of our communities, our neighbors in deportation defense. Previously, this was funded at $350,000. That was supposed to cover the last 2 years. So what we're calling for is a $400,000 investment. To put in perspective, and I didn't even write it here, it's pennies. It's pennies of the police department. So what we're really calling for is a reimagination. Again, in perspective, looking at this year's 2020 adopted police budget, $244 million. Imagine what we could do if we cut 50% of that, $122 million. What can we do? Reimagine what we can do with 25%, $61 million. We can build 800 affordable housing units per year. That means $61 million would be our local funding that we can then use to leverage state, federal, and private funding to fund and build 800 affordable housing units per year. This will go a long way to solving the homelessness crisis. Even a 10% cut, $24 million, that will fund, if we reinvest that $24 million into the health department, that will fund 300 public health nurses, housing specialists, outreach workers in the health department. And in yellow here, these very, very simple but a critical asks that we are asking for. Right to counsel for renters. That's only a less than 2% cut of the police budget. A fully funded language access policy, so we include all members of our community, no matter what language they speak. That's less than a 1% cut of the police budget. And the last line here is, this is $3.2 million, the city's proposed racial equity and reconciliation funding. That's only 1.3 or 1% of the police budget. That is inadequate to resolve and to put us on the pathway towards resolving racism in our city. So what can we do? This is our call to action, and we have very specific and concrete steps you can do. And James, it would be awesome if you can drop these links again into the chat. We have set up a click to email the mayor and the city council. Super easy, takes a minute. It might take a bit longer if you wanted to customize it, put in your own words and experiences. But we have a template letter already set up for you. That's at bit.ly/defundlbpd letter. Click to action, super quick. You can do it in a minute. You can also email, call, and social media tag your council members. Contact information and talking points and all sort of the resources you need, plus all of the links to the official city documents. That is at bit.ly/people's budget toolkit. And finally, this Tuesday is the Long Beach Police Department budget hearing. It is at a sort of an earlier time than normal at 3 p.m. But on August 18th, 3 p.m., we're going to hear from the police department. We're going to hear them justify their costs and what they are costing Long Beach taxpayers. And so we want folks to mobilize virtually, listen to the hearing. And if you're so inclined, please sign up to speak, make your voice heard. The sign up sheet, and this is new, this is COVID era democracy, where we do have to sign up in advance at the city clerk's website. So we have already created a short link to do that, bit.ly/LBPD hearing to sign up to speak. Unfortunately, they only allow 20 speakers per agenda item. So really for this hearing, they're only gonna allow 20 public speakers. 20 people out of a city of 500,000. Is that just? Is that democratic? No. That is the process we're dealing with. And that is another reason why we have to make our voices heard in all of these different modes and methods. So please, we call on you to take action. let your council members know and let the mayor know how you're feeling about how your taxpayer dollars are going. With that, I'm going to pause, and both James and I are happy to take questions and to have a dialogue in the remaining time that we have.
Thanks, Elsa. So much good information. I wanted to address some questions that were coming in already. Dave had a really great question around the differences between the total salaries and wages, hours, benefits for the specific 34 positions in the police department versus the 28.7 civilian positions and the over under. Definitely something we can research more. And I think connecting with you and we can figure out some of the nuts and bolts and work with you and to figure that out, that would be awesome. So I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can look at that together.
Well, and honestly, I think that's a great question for the council members to ask the department. You know, what is the so-called savings here?
Yep. Yes, so that's a really great point, and I would encourage you to other questions too. I think emailing the city council even ahead of Tuesday's hearing, so they know what is on people's minds, I think would be fantastic. There was another question about, can we look at other cities that have reformed their budgets to lessen the size of police departments and move towards less violent collusions with the communities? This is a common question that we've gotten a lot. And the short and unfortunate answer, the exciting answer, I would argue, is that this is new territory, right? So this is a conversation that we are simultaneously going through across the country. And there, it's difficult and a bit premature to point to one particular city and say, well, here's one way that, this worked really well, and we can look at that kind of model. And I will say there are a lot of attempts, and there was an interesting proposal that's coming out, and was hearing from a couple of organizers in Chicago who were talking about a compact and a plan that the U.S. Conference of Mayors is putting together that is not calling for defunding the police, but looking at ways that they could reform police and invest in other outside social issues, but not touch the huge inequities in funding with the police department. So that's very much not defunding the police. And I would argue and assert that we can, throw enough money into all of people's budget priorities, for instance, but if we're not touching the massive spending in the police budget, then we're just going to perpetuate these same kind of harms. The other thing I would point out too, and I can drop a link in the chat box, or if you would like to Google this yourself and read it more in depth, you're welcome to. Actually, in New York City, back in 2017, they actually found that because of the police department, NYPD, decided to do a bit of a work stoppage because of what was going on. They actually found that crime complaints went down when cops took a break from proactive policing, right? So the police department had actually said, well, if we don't like the way things are going, so we're not going to do proactive policing. And they actually found that crime went down. So that's some interesting evidence to talk about the reason why certain communities are over-policed, and this idea, right, that oftentimes when communities are over-policed, there's all these instances where we're finding that police are proactively either pulling people over or inciting violence, right? Because that's the framework of our modern policing state. So I'll drop a link into the chat box if you want to read more about that in the LA Times, but the news headline is, in New York, major crime complaints fell when cops took a break from proactive policing. So great further argument for defunding the police. And yes, we are going to, all of these are on our website, and these slides will be updated by tomorrow morning with the links to these recordings on our Long Beach Forward website, lbforward.org/peoples-budget. And we'll post links around on social media to make sure all of that is there. This is also on Facebook and YouTube right now, so you can feel free to share all of those as well. And please, please do share this and get it out there as much as possible too. There's also some other questions I wanted to mention. Let's see, that around like public comments and things like that. So yes, I would also encourage you, if you find it pretty atrocious that City Council is only allowing 20 public commenters on each item, we agree wholeheartedly. To us, that is not a good sign of a healthy and thriving democracy. So I would encourage you to contact your council member and let them know that as well. And we know there's a lot of folks who have already signed up for public comment, but the biggest thing too that is really, really impactful is directly emailing your council member and inundating their inboxes and letting them know what your priorities are, what you support, but also just listening in. So I guarantee you Tuesday night is going to be a fun time because it's important that we understand. And we've already heard council members talk about, they don't support any cuts from the police department, or that they want to see even more cuts from different departments so that we don't have to cut further from the police department. So this is a conversation that's already happening, and we want to make sure people are engaged in this conversation too. So, and I agree, it's a great question why we cannot see their faces. I would also love to see our council members' faces on each of these council meetings. Elsa, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you all for tuning in on your Thursday evening. This is a pretty momentous time, a momentous movement. And, we're really hoping to make some significant structural change, but that can't happen without all of us. And so really, yeah, just encourage you to follow these links and make some noise, make some serious noise. The police budget hearing is going to be pretty wild. So please tune in. It's actually not at night. It's at 3 p.m. again, which is like inconvenient for working people. Is that intentional or not? Yeah, well, we can have our speculations. But please tune in and really make some noise. Yeah, we need to defund LGBT and reinvest in Black lives and communities of color. So thank you all for tuning in.
One other quick thing, I just saw a comment on Facebook from one of our followers that reminded me, actually starting right now at 7 o'clock, if you would like to join, the city is hosting a community budget meeting that's open to all residents. And so I would encourage you, if you want to use some of this newfound knowledge that you have and raise your voice and contribute to the conversation there, I would encourage you and welcome you to do that. longbeach.gov, you can find all the info on their budget page. And it's all virtual, so you can just tune in from the comfort of your bed or couch and engage that way as well. So I agree, let's do this.
James, what's happening right after, also at 7 p.m.?
At 7 p.m., and literally in 5 minutes, we're going to do the same presentation in Spanish. So if you know anyone who is a monolingual Spanish speaker, please share this information as well. And it'll all be accessible on social media and our website as well too. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.